Hello everybody. Today's project is the FV101 Scorpion. I'm painting up actually two at a time today just to make it quick and easy. I already have the paints out. I thought I'd do two. I'm doing this so I can play some skirmish games with the new Flank March Miniatures Cold War British Kickstarter. These miniatures you see here are from that Kickstarter. I painted them up and I'm going to play some games, but I thought a couple Scorpions would be a lot of fun to have. The Scorpion's a light recon tank, which makes it small and fairly quick and easy to paint up. Now, this model is a 3D printed model from Bob Mac 3D, and you can find it at our store at bobmac3d.com. This version has the crew from the Flank March Miniatures Kickstarter. The crew members, there's a couple variations, one where only his head's sticking out, and the other one where he's much more in a recon mode with binoculars and his whole torso's sticking out of the turret. Both of them turned out fantastic and really nice to add to the model. Before we get started on our project, I just wanted to remind you to like, subscribe our channel so that you can get more content. It really helps us out and it helps us reach more modelers and gamers like yourself. Now, let's get on with the project. Here I've listed out all the steps that I've done. If you've watched the FV432 videos, the steps are almost identical. Of course, they're painted very similar, and so of course the steps will be very similar. The big difference here is I found a paint set from Hataka, I think that's how you pronounce it, but I'm not very familiar with the brand, but they made a modern British Army paint set. And I thought, what a great opportunity to try this, and so I picked the set up and I used it on the Scorpion. It had a NATO green and a NATO black in it, and those are the two key colors I'm using to paint up the Scorpion. So I'm going to use these new colors and see how they turn out. The first step in the process is pre-shading. That's of course after you prime it, but pre-shading is the thing I always do on my vehicles. I really like how it turns out in the end. I use a black paint, acrylic, and I use any black paint. Doesn't really matter what you use here, but I thin it down quite a bit so it flows really nicely through the airbrush. And then I go over the model and I look for any cracks or crevices, joint lines, exhaust panels, anything like that, and I pre-shade it. I make them dark. Anywhere you think there should be darkness to the model, go ahead and do a pre-shade on it. This will give you a color shift after you put on the base color. So it gives you a tonal difference that really makes your model look good. And here are the two Scorpions pre-shaded and ready to go. Now on to the base color. I use that Hataka NATO green as the base color for the Scorpions. Remember that when you put this on, you want to do it in light coats. You don't want to heavily soak the model with paint. The reason we're doing that is because I want some of the black pre-shading to be visible through this layer of paint, so that when I'm done here, I have some nice variation in tones. I'm going to speed up the camera here because I want you to watch how I paint the entire model in successive coats. That way you can see how the paint develops on the model. So I'll just speed it up right here. Now that the base layer is done, I add some yellow to the paint in the cup. So when I'm doing the base color, I'm always adding a little bit of paint so I have enough paint to cover the model. But when I'm done covering it, I just add some yellow into the paint that's in the cup. Mix it up in the cup right there in the airbrush, and then I start highlighting the model. Ultimately, I do this twice. I do 2 highlight layers, one with a little bit of yellow into it to make it highlight, and then the second time I add a little white to the yellow so that it's a little bit brighter and do a final highlight. So here I'm doing the first highlight and I'm just picking out flat surfaces, right? This is the hatch covers. This is any flat armor panels. This is, let's say, around the turret ring. Anywhere the sun is going to hit or anywhere that's exposed to the sun, I want to make it brighter than the rest of the model. Here you can see both holes of the Scorpion with the first highlight on it. Hopefully you can see on the top panels that extra highlighting. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add white to the mixture I already had before. And adding white brightens it up even more. Then I'm going to hit even a smaller area than I highlighted before in the previous step. So this is the second highlight, smaller areas, and just those that would be of the brightest. The very top of a hatch, let's say, or the very top of a panel, or the very top of something that sticks out. And those are the things I'm looking for when I do this particular highlight. With the highlighting done, it's time to start adding the black stripes. These black stripes I'm going to put on the model using this masking putty. This masking putty will allow me to protect the green areas that I just did and paint only the areas that I want black. I do this because this kind of camouflage typically has a hard edge to it. Whereas if I freehanded this camouflage, you'd get a fuzzy edge to the black stripes, which I don't want. I want a more of a hard edge to it to make it more distinctive and more authentic to what I see in the pictures of the Scorpion. The putty's kind of fun to work with. It's like silly putty if you're familiar with that, but basically you can stretch this out and make it more elastic as you warm it up in your hands. You can make a shape and then you start putting it over the model where you want to protect the green paint. And so therefore you'll leave open what you want black. Now, as a quick note, the British camouflage, the black stripes, weren't actually stripes all the way across the vehicle. So make sure you don't just put a bunch of, 3 bands of black over the vehicle. They should move around at different angles, and at the top of the vehicle, they should connect in one way or the other. When putting on the putty, you're going to want to make sure that it completely seals to the model so that you get that nice hard edge. And sometimes with just your fingers, it's hard to work with, especially in detailed areas. So don't be afraid to use an X-Acto knife or the end of a paintbrush, something that's small and allows you to push around the putty to get it in exactly where you want it to go. Another interesting thing about this putty is if you give it time, meaning if you just let it sit there, it tends to seep into the details of the model. It's really kind of fascinating. And sometimes I want that to happen, and sometimes I don't. So the speed at which I put the putty on depends on how much I want it to lock in and lock onto the model, or how much I want to be able to peel it off easier later. Here's the final product where you can see the putty on the model. And remember, where you see green will actually be black in the next step here when we spray on the camo stripes. I also wanted to remind you that I'm doing two of these vehicles at once, so you might see a difference of which one I'm painting. Now it's time to paint the black stripes. Again, I'm using that Hataka NATO Black. And what I love about NATO Black is that it's not truly black. There's just a tinge of gray to it, so it makes it look faded, makes it look really nice. I do another step here in a second where I'll highlight the black with a grayer black to give it some depth, and it really makes it sharp. But here I'm just taking the black and I'm spraying wherever the mask allows me to spray. And we'll see how that turns out in just a second. Once you have the black stripes done, add a little bit of gray to your black in your paint cup, mix it up, and then just dust the black stripes again, paying attention to those areas that should be highlighted, the top of the panels, the top of the armor. This lightens up the stripes in that area and really makes them look nice. Now for the fun part. Removing the putty is very satisfying. Be careful with it. Go slowly. Make sure you don't rip off any details of the model because it will cling. And then once you pull that putty off, you can see your particular stripes, your camouflage pattern that you put down. And here's how they turned out. You can see the black stripes with their nice, clean, crisp lines to them. Thought it really turned out nice. Now, after painting the camouflage, the next step is to do details. This is bags, boxes, crates, shovels, tools, anything that you can find on the miniature to highlight to make it not green. I specifically printed out the stowed versions of these Scorpions so that I'd have more things to paint different than the base green that's out there. Even if you have a box that's supposed to be green, it probably isn't the same shade or the same green as the NATO green of the base vehicle. So I'll paint it an olive drab, or I'll paint it a darker green, just something different. So picking out those details really helps your vehicle look nice. There was a lot to paint on these vehicles because I printed the stowed versions. There was lots of details to add, especially on the turrets. The turrets were particularly loaded with bags and boxes and things like that. So take your time here, do a good job. I do sometimes a little bit of shading. I do a little bit of color variation, but the pen wash in the next step will really make the details come out. So sometimes I don't worry too much about how much I shade or how much I make these particular details look nice. The next step in the process after you get the details painted is a pen wash. The pin wash is the thing that brings out all the little nooks and crannies and details in the model. But before you do this step, you'll want to coat this in a gloss coat. You're going to want to protect all the work that you've done on the model so far. And a nice gloss coat will do that for you. The glossiness also helps the pin wash to run through the crevices that you'll want it to run through. And so gloss coat your model and then do a pin wash. In my pin wash, I use the same thing I used on the FV432, which is that Ammo of MIG dark wash. And it really works well on this color set, particularly the green. Really makes it look nice. The dark wash on the black camouflage is a little bit of a challenge. It's hard to see sometimes. I do it anyway, but it is difficult to see when you're doing it, to see where you've hit and where you haven't. The next step after the pin wash is to do a pin wash cleanup. This is done with a soft bristle brush with just a little bit of enamel thinner on it. Make sure there's not too much, otherwise it'll wipe clean all the work you just did. All you want to do is go into the areas where the pin wash went or ran where you don't want it to show up. Sometimes when you hit pin wash around a detail, too much will glob around it and you'll see kind of a water stainy look. You'll want to take this soft bristle brush and just wipe away any extra. This works like magic and it's really a fun step to do and it makes your model pop. I do want to talk about my process for tracks here at the end of this video. And that is, I paint up the tracks completely black in the beginning. I totally spray every single piece, all the road wheels, all the tracks, everything completely black. Then I paint the wheels themselves along with the rest of the model. So when I'm doing the base color, I paint it with the base color. When I do the highlights, I hit it with a highlight. And then I do the pin wash to it just like I treated it like the rest of the vehicle. But the only part I do is the wheels themselves, right? I leave the track completely black for everything else. Then at the end, I use this product called Track Wash. It's an Ammo of MIG product and it has a rusty type of color to it. And the combination of that track wash with the black paint always turns out fairly nice for the model. And so that's exactly what I'm doing here, is adding the track wash. And this is the final step for me for doing this model. After the pin wash, I do the track wash, and then I assemble the model, and I hit it with a matte coat, matte varnish, the entire thing, probably 3-4 times, because I know I'm going to game with it, and I don't want to chip the model that I just spent all this time on. And here we are with the final product. 2 FV101 Scorpions ready for the game table. This is quick and easy process, made it so I could paint 2 of these at a time and get them on the table so I can get to gaming. Don't forget to check out the Flank March Miniatures Boar Kickstarter. I'll have a link to it in the description below, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, guys. If you have suggestions of what my models you want me to paint next, please leave them down in the description below. Thanks.